Capital is abundant. Understanding is scarce. The Dynamo Show goes deep with the new industrialists rejuvenating industry and commerce. Brought to you by Dynamo Ventures. Learn more at dynamo.vc/podcast. Now, here's your host, Madelyn O'Farrell.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Dynamo Show. I'm your host, Madelyn O'Farrell, and we're excited to be joined by Keith Smith today, president of Vonco Products. Keith, thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to be with you today, Madelyn.
First, would love to just get your story. Tell us how you got into this world of manufacturing and what that journey's really been like for you.
Yeah, thanks. I've been in manufacturing for ever, I guess, at least in my lifetime when I could. So I started in cabinet making when I was 15 years old, but then ended up at a print shop, which is really the career I've taken ever since then. So 32 years or so in printing and laminating and converting and bag making. It really was just part of where I grew up, and it was accessible, and then just fell in love with it. I started to take industrial engineering to support my passion for continuous improvement in manufacturing, learned design, develop products, improve those products, and just created a passion for that. And then I wanted to run a business and started working my way down the business track after engineering, and ultimately was able to finally achieve a dream of mine of owning my own business.
Amazing. And are you referring to Vonco when you say that?
Yeah, Vonco Products, yep.
Fantastic. Well, it's a great segue then into talking about what it is that Vonco does. Tell us a little bit about what you manufacture, who you manufacture for, and maybe what makes you different from other contract manufacturers.
Yeah. Vonco, as you said, is a medical device contract manufacturer. What's neat about Vonco is we focus on single-use and disposable products. What are those? It's the easiest way to think about it is collection devices out of thin films and to create containers for fluids in and out of the body. So as you imagine, many procedures, there's IVs going in, you might need to be on a tube, and then on the way out, many other products collecting blood, nursing products, depending on what procedures and processes the hospital is entertaining. What's neat about Vonco from different contract manufacturing organizations is a very, let's call it horizontal strategy. We see many contract manufacturing have a few tracks of what they can provide to a device. We call them original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, and that it's certainly helpful from a cost standpoint. But what we see is there's lots of needs by these OEMs, and there's a process to validate and run and qualify these products. And as we have created expertise in that area, we have been able to provide a horizontal product strategy with also providing packaging, sterilization management, and contract packaging as well. So we can make the device, we can make the package, we can contract package it, insert it, weld it, and then manage that sterilization. So you have a full turnkey horizontal strategy to complete a project. So it makes projects much simpler than have multiple vendors. For a med device company, there's a lot of work to have. Every qualified vendor requires a fair amount of activity to maintain. So if we can provide more of a service across all those vendors, we become a bit unique from that standpoint.
Fantastic. And due to the nature of the space in which you operate, med devices, a product failure is not just a defect. It can have real patient consequences, right? A leak in a medical fluid bag, for example. What does that mean for the way that you go about designing and manufacturing products?
Yeah. We're freaks about leaks. We just can't have leaks. So, there's all types of ways that gets incorporated. We have what's called Liqui Lock guarantee. It's a trademark name, but representing our unconditional guarantee that our products won't leak. So many ways we work towards that. In many of our processes, our sealing and cutting technologies are poka-yoke, so that you literally could not get a bag out if it was not sealed and cut properly. So that's a great technology to have to help that. In other cases, we have validation strategies that allow us to understand the process parameters that are required to maintain a leak-proof bag and really live by that. All the way to the way we incentivize every person in our organization around, if there's leaks, there's no incentive, and so it's literally freaks about leaks.
I love that.
Yeah.
One of the technologies that you use is RF welding. It's pretty central to the way you go about manufacturing. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what that is and why it matters for the specific types of products that you guys are producing?
Yeah, there's two methodologies, primary methodologies that we use. One you alluded to is RF. Another one is really heat seal welding. Specifically on RF, it has a really specific purposes around different polymers, polar materials. So they aren't easily welded with heat. So you use radio frequency, which creates this frequency that allows the weld to happen from the inside out. It excites the molecules to create energy. Energy creates heat, and then allows the products to be welded together, whether it's to itself or other products. Heat, as you might imagine, is just the opposite, and of course, heat's coming down on top of it and welding and driving the energy from the outside of the, let's call it, bag to the inside. So that mostly welds are non-polar materials. So again, similar to this horizontal strategy, we want to offer all these different polymers depending on what type of application is necessary. So having both RF and heat allows us to provide all types of chemistries to our customers.
That's really helpful. I appreciate that. You run the Spark program, which brings together your engineering, your operations, your customer success teams, and you put them together in a room with customers at the concept stage. Can you walk us through what that practically entails?
Yeah, it's so fun. It's some of my favorite days when customers show up on site here and they go into our prototyping studios and start working on, what if we did this and what if we did that? And in many cases, it can take weeks or months for every iteration. And so we're able to really streamline projects because we can iterate same day with multiple different samples, multiple different styles, and say, okay, if we want to go to scale now, instead of having to run very costly scalable processes to iterate, we can now do this, pick one or two to see how it looks at scale. And that's how it works. And we can do this via web if need be, but the most efficient process is to do it on site and get products back into marketing's hands and product managers.
Has there ever been an idea that a customer brought you that maybe others had walked away from, or maybe just one that surprised you?
We had looked at some certain areas in enteral feeding, actually, and customers brought ideas of enteral feeds in a pouch, moving them from one thing to another, and we had come up with an idea to be able to direct connect foods directly to the tube, and came up with basically it's a spout that you weld into a pouch, and it's similar to like a baby food. Instead of doing it orally, it just twists into the tube that's connected to the tummy. And yeah, we had this idea and concept for a little while, and finally found a great customer that's adopted that technology and has been growing dramatically year after year after year, landing multiple new hospital contracts due to the ease of use of that technology versus multiple steps to administer the feed. We go to conferences now with this, and nurses just say this is so much easier.
Amazing. That has to feel good.
It's called Enteral Lock. So again, similar Liqui Lock, Enteral Lock, play on that Enteral word, of course.
Got it. Fantastic. You as a manufacturer sit in the intersection of some really hot topics right now, right? Tariff policy, energy market volatility. And you recently wrote that a lot of those are sort of converging to create a geopolitical moment that's somewhat unique. Can you tell us a little bit about your thinking there and what's actually happening in your supply chains today?
Yeah, yeah. It's chaotic today. The Iran conflict has certainly created um, constraints globally. Luckily, U.S. and Canada are isolated from that, but in a global commodity, the global disruption will certainly create demand spikes and supply shortages. And so we've been fortunate to not be on that supply shortage side, but that demand spike creates an opportunity for price to go up because U.S. and Canada are helping supply the rest of the world with plastic right now, and so it is quite volatile, and prices are moving faster than we've seen in decades, if ever, quite frankly. So yeah, that's been challenging, but the question is like what's happening in the supply chains, and what's been really intriguing to me is that if you look at one thing in isolation, you're saying, hey, my global supply chain strategy is sound, and we just need to get through this moment. But to your point, you started talking about you had a COVID moment where the global supply chain shut down. It was not too long ago. You have the tariffs that happened, about a little over a year or two ago, and now you've got the Iran conflict, and so the uncertainty and instability continues to accelerate, quite frankly, versus stabilize, and so I think you get a fair amount of real looks at what's the best strategy, supply chain strategy, and I think certainly we've seen the countries like China have really low cost labor impact, and have been able to really make an inroads in the U.S. From a manufacturing standpoint, and I do believe that there's real looks at basically just supply chain stability, and what that means is maybe nearshoring or onshoring, and we are seeing more and more activity around those areas to make sure that in any situation that we don't stock out. I mean, we're talking about medical device. We need to continue to make sure the patients are first and foremost, that products continue to move to support patients that are in a lot of times life and death situations.
Absolutely. And that point you made around it's no longer managing through a moment of volatility, but rather restructuring your strategy to handle volatility on an ongoing basis because it's effectively the norm. This is something that we continue to hear from folks, not just in manufacturing, but in logistics and trucking and elsewhere, kind of across the supply chain. So appreciate that. And you just touched on reshoring. Now, you've been a manufacturer for many years here in the US, long before reshoring was kind of a trend or a hot topic. Tell us about what the reshoring narrative has really meant for your conversations with your customers.
Yeah, probably a bit before offshoring became popular. But it's an interesting one because there's this the dream world is to, okay, can we get a cost structure built so that there is no trade-off? Yeah, I get the best of both worlds. And I think it's been tough to create that reality just because of the labor cost differences that, the U.S. worker should get, and compared to what, someone like China might be providing. So, labor content matters in those conversations. So if you're dealing with something that has is highly automated, I think, U.S. manufacturing is the easy spot to start, because if your labor content is less than 10%, and, you have even if you have a 75% difference in labor wages, it ends up not being as significant in your overall price. Where it comes to, a challenge is when you have, maybe smaller volumes and complicated products that create these manual assemblies to create the product. You now have a little tougher equation to consider. And then, of course, you always have the non-recurring engineering fees, the validation fees to make that switch. So those are the conversations you end up in trying to figure out what's the best way to create, the right diversification strategy in your supply chain.
And on that point of keeping medical device inventory in stock and how paramount that is, you've also talked about the risks of overcorrecting and what kind of stockpiling can mean. So, in your view, what is really well executed kind of risk mitigation look like?
Yeah. Just talk about COVID, right? That was certainly an area that created this big whipsaw supply chain. And so, I'll talk a little bit about this with my own team so they can understand it, and the workforce is that, if you recall, what happened to toilet paper, as soon as COVID hit, it's not like people had to poop more. they literally had, were, scare buying, fear, buying on fear that somehow we're going to run out of toilet paper. And so, of course, you can't ramp up that quickly based on that, and it creates this kind of false demand. And of course, after the pandemic settled down, there was this snapback, and so it creates all of these undue costs, right, in the supply chain on both sides of it. And so, certainly in the dream world is, there's not panic buying, but if again, I get it, right, from a medical device OEM, they're not going to risk stocking out. So it's going to create this whipsaw effect. And so, yeah, as long as what's been nice for Vonco anyway is that the majority of our supply chain is domestic, and for the most part, domestic supply chains were quite reactive in all these situations. And so stockouts really weren't something we had to deal with. Lead times did go out, but certainly it wasn't, you just can't access product, or things went on allocation.
A bit of a testament to the reshoring concept,
Right,
then.
exactly.
Understood. One thing I'd love to pick your brain about is automation and the degree to which Vonco is incorporating that or thinking about that. Many of the tasks that you have in your manufacturing facility are quite labor intensive. And at the same time, a lot of those trades are quite difficult to fill. And so I'm curious how you're thinking about the role that automation plays in your business.
Yeah, every day. So, yeah, the way we think about it is what's the priority, because there's so many areas now that automation is starting to improve and create. So from the standpoint of stacking to the packing out to trying to use cobots and robotics to move products around, it's constant. And I agree with you. the part of it is the staffing challenges that's occurred, as well as just back to that equation. The more we can automate, and that's the great leveler. If America can outpace the other countries in automation, it's not going to matter what the labor divide is. So that's where the opportunities are. So we continue to experiment. There's a lot of failed experiments in automation, unfortunately, but we learn from every experiment of how to continue to drive cost out and drive automation and make growth easier from that standpoint.
Just to double click on that, I'm curious, for all of the robotics companies or physical AI startups, as we're using the term these days, when they show up to your door and they're pitching you on an automation solution, what gets you excited? What would actually be compelling?
Yeah, well, we deal with a lot of thin films, and so thin films have a little bit of a challenge with the pick and place type systems. So if you imagine you have a rigid product like a pen, it's easier to pick that up. And if you have a thin film, it wants to like fold over. The speed of moving it might blow it in a certain direction, and then when you stack it, it's not as reliable to land in the same spot. So if someone came in and said, "Hey, look, I've figured out this way to move these thin films around at super high speeds," that person gets a meeting immediately.
Fair enough. Okay, good to know. Last question for you. Vonco's been in business for many years and has lasted many disruption cycles. And so, what's the operating philosophy that's allowed you to continue on through that disruption? And what would you tell another medical device OEM about how to design a supply chain that holds up in an increasingly unpredictable world?
Sure. Yeah. I grapple with the strategy here, but we are very diversified. So no single customer is more than really 7% of the business, and so that allows us to live in a space. Now you might have urology down for a certain period of time, but Enteral's up, or IV's up, and dialysis is down, or they're overstocked. So there's just multiple ways we're able to diversify that. Also, might have packaging going faster than device, and vice versa. There might be more R&D going on in device and new projects going on there, and packaging's a little bit slow and overstocked. So there's all types of diversity ways we do that. Now the trade-off with that strategy is yes, we can survive a lot of these peaks and valleys, but there's a kind of a overhead SG&A cost to handle so many diverse product lines that prevents us from always being the lowest cost provider. But the supply chain certainty is there. Our reach to get all types of different polymers and materials is deep and wide because of all the products and projects we run. So usually these challenges, we look pretty good from a supply standpoint.
Fantastic. Great tips. Well, Keith, thank you so much for joining us here on the show today. We've really appreciated all your perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Madelyn. Very, very good questions.
Thanks so much. And to our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in to the Dynamo Show once again. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked. And be sure to head over to podcast.dynamo.vc to keep up to date with our latest content, or subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Until next time.